Okay, good evening. Going to resume our class on Rambam's Sefer HaMadah, Maimonides' Book of Cognition. So we have now completed the laws of the foundations of the Torah. We've completed the laws of the virtues, dispositions, or attitudes. And we're about to start the laws of Talmud Torah, the laws of Torah study. And what we've seen is that Rambam radically reinterprets Judaism from his rationalist perspective. Now, since Hilchot Talmud Torah, the laws of Torah study, deals with the study of Torah, with the intellectual aspect of Jewish practice, you might expect that some of that radicalism of Rambam's would come through in this section. And you'd be right. It will. So there are going to be three big questions that I want to focus on, each of which has very important contemporary relevance, although my purpose here is not to give a general account that I endorse, it's to try and explain Maimonides' views. But the first question would be, how inclusive is the study of Torah as Rambam understands it? Inclusivity. Second question is about the economics of teaching Torah. And that's, of course, a very big issue today as well, with the ever-rising cost of Jewish education. And the third question, which is perhaps where his personal radicalism comes through the most, has to do with the content of Torah study. What exactly is it that you study when you study Torah? And we'll see that his view of that is very different from any standard view with which he might be familiar, and that the codes that come after the Rambam, such as the Shulchan Aruch, even though they use his words, completely change the meaning and abandon the rationalist view that he had put forward. So, the first question then is inclusivity. And in fact, that's what the Rambam starts with. The first chapter of Hilchot Talmud Torah, which I've given you here, begins and ends with women, which is extremely interesting. It's not clear why. I'll try to explain why, I think. But it's not clear why Rambam should do that. As we'll see, he begins by essentially excluding women. Why start with that? He could have started, for example, with the 8th halakha. And I apologize for the handout. You have to turn it over when you get to the other side. But the 8th halakha starts with Kol ish miYisrael chayav b'Talmud Torah. Every Jewish man has an obligation to study the Torah, whether you're poor, whether you're rich, and so on. That would have been a natural way to start, and then you could go on from there, and eventually you could get to the fact that certain people are exempt. And in fact, had that thought, once I looked at the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch, which are the two major codes that come after Rambam, that's exactly how they start. They start by saying, okay, here's an obligation, every male has this. At some point they say, oh, by the way, women don't have it, and so on. But Rambam starts with Nashim v'avodim uktanim paturim mitalmud Torah. Some versions, by the way, don't even mention katanim here, minors, right? So he starts by saying, women and servants are exempt from Talmud Torah. And as we'll see in a minute, the very last halacha of the perek comes back to the question of women studying Torah. So why is that what frames the very first chapter? Rambam, we know, is very careful with the organization of the halachas. So why did he organize it that way? Well, I'm going to make a suggestion. Now, first of all, two reasons that I want to suggest are not why he's doing it. So you might think that, let's distinguish between conservatism versus progressivism in one realm and in another realm. So social conservatism would be the desire to maintain certain social hierarchies and ranks and differentiations. And a certain kind of progressivism, social progressivism, would be to somehow change or eliminate those roles. Then, secondly, there's something that a lot of my colleagues in philosophy are talking about right now, which is epistemic conservatism and progressivism. So that would have to do with knowledge. Right? So people are talking a lot these days about epistemic justice. And it's clear that there are classes of people in our society who do not have equal access, do not have the same access as others to knowledge, not only as a body of knowledge, but also to the training and the skills for forming rational beliefs and acquiring knowledge. And that's a very important aspect of discrimination in our society. So similarly, you could be an epistemic conservative. You could want to maintain the existing hierarchy with respect to knowledge, or an epistemic progressive. You could be somebody who wants to change the existing hierarchy and undo some of the discrimination. So you might think the Rambam starts by talking about women because he's a social progressive. He wants to change the role of women in society. I think that's clearly not the case. Right? Rambam is a social conservative. He doesn't have any major critique of the role of women in our society. He lives in an Islamic society where women presumably had fairly limited and well-defined social roles. I see no indication that he wants to change that.
And you intentionally left out slaves?
Yes. I don't want to talk about that right now, but thank you. Yes. So the other possibility you might think is relevant here, but I want to exclude, is epistemic conservatism. You might think that Rambam is excluding women right at the outset because he doesn't think women should be participating in knowledge or the acquisition of knowledge and so on. That's also, I think, not the case. And in fact, it's exactly the reverse. That's what I want to say. Rambam is a social conservative, but he's an epistemic progressive. Part of the radicalism of the whole project is that he wants to include as many people as possible in the distribution and the acquisition of knowledge. Now, he wants to do that without changing society. You may argue that's not possible, and you could be right, but I think that's his view. Right? So I think that the reason why he begins and ends the first chapter of Hilchot Talmud Torah with women is because this really bothers him. Not because he's a feminist, he's not a social progressive, but he's an epistemic progressive. He has to have women participating in the acquisition of knowledge. And yet, as he says, it is established on the basis of the Talmudic discussion that women are exempt from Torah study. I think the reason why women are exempt from Torah study, although it's not spelled out here, is connected to the reason why women were exempt from mitzvah saseh shazman grama, from positive commandments that have a time determination. Women, and this is where servants also come in, were, socially speaking, considered to be constantly occupied with the needs of the household. So to impose on them an obligation that requires them to go and pray at a certain time or do something else at a certain time during the day seemed incompatible with that social role. Now, Talmud Torah does not have a fixed time, but that's exactly the point. It actually has, and this is connected to something that we talked about in a different context recently. Talmud Torah has no shiur, it has no measure at all. You're supposed to be involved in it all the time, that you're not doing anything else. But that also seemed, I think, to Chazal, incompatible with this social role of women. I think Rambam has a problem because, on his view, and remember this is called the Book of Cognition, Sefer HaMadah, women, just as much as anybody else, is created in the image of God, are created in the image of God. The image of God, as he tells us in the Guide of the Perplexed, that means to say the intellect. Women have to perfect their intellects. They have intellects, they have to perfect them. The very first mitzvahs that we considered in Hilchot Yisarei Torah, the laws of the foundations of the Torah, were to know, to acquire the knowledge that God exists and is one, that God is incorporeal, and to come to love and fear God through the study of physics. Those were completely universal mitzvahs. They didn't refer specifically to Jews, but to all people. And they didn't refer to any particular gender. They explicitly were referred to women as well. Now, it's impossible to acquire the knowledge that God exists and is one and incorporeal and so on, and to love God through the study of physics without education. It's not possible.
Rambam is the one who says the way to do that is through learning physics?
Yes.
That's his take
Absolutely. Yes.
of how the world works?
Yes, that is very central to his view of Judaism. So I think that we have to understand that Talmud Torah, for him, is going to be something very specific. It's a theoretical study for its own sake, and it's distinct from education. Education, you couldn't possibly say that women are exempt from education, because women could not fulfill the most fundamental mitzvahs of Judaism without education. And I think that's why he starts off by talking about women being exempt and comes back to women learning in the very last halacha, which we're about to read. So in the first halacha, he says, Nashim ba'avodim k'tanim p'turim miTalmud Torah. Women, servants, and minors are exempt from Talmud Torah. You'll see if you look at another version of the text that doesn't even mention minors in that section at all, but this is the Bodleian manuscript. Aval koton, but a minor, aviv chayav lalamda Torah. His father is obliged to teach him Torah. Shneimar v'limadatem osam es b'neichem l'daber bom. As it says in the Shema, of course, right? And you shall teach them to your children, talking about them. And of course, it's very interesting that although the mitzvah is to learn Torah, the proof text is to teach Torah. And it's an inference from that, right? Since we have an obligation to teach Torah, we must also have an obligation to learn, because you can't teach what you haven't learned. But it doesn't actually say explicitly, you should learn Torah. I mean, there are other texts that strongly suggest that, but as far as the Gemara and Rambam are concerned, the proof text, it has to do with teaching.
And if you can't teach it, you haven't really learned it.
That's also true. And we'll see later, though, that that it's understood not everybody is able to teach, and therefore you are permitted to hire somebody else to do the job. We'll come back to that. That has to do with the second big question. I said inclusivity is the first one, economics of Talmud Torah is the second one, and the third one is the content of Torah study. So the father has the duty to teach the son Torah, and it is a gendered mitzvah as far as the Rambam is concerned. Ve'ein ha'isha chayeves l'lamed es bena. A woman is under no obligation to teach her son. Shekol chayav l'mod chayav l'lamed, because it's only one whose duty is to learn that who has a duty to teach. But again, what I want to say is that we have to distinguish this specific mitzvah of Talmud Torah from chinuch. Chinuch, education, is in a different category. We have a concept of hechsher mitzvah, a preparation for a mitzvah. So, there's a mitzvah to blow the shofar. Now, obviously, you have to actually prepare the shofar as well. If you didn't prepare the shofar, you wouldn't be able to blow it, and so on, right? But the mitzvah is to blow the shofar. So, similarly, I would say, for the Rambam, it must be the case that education, which includes all Jews, women as well, is part of the preparation for the fundamental mitzvahs that he elaborated already.
Excuse me, it says, vow to tosh Torah pinecha. So, if you're not supposed to ignore the learning of your mother, that means the mother was supposed to have learned so that she can teach you something.
Mm-hmm. Yes. But again, I agree completely, but technically it wouldn't be Talmud Torah as far as the Rambam is concerned. Now, of course, there are other views about this. Again, I'm not going to discuss all the other views that there are, but I'm just trying to explain the Rambam's view.
How would you define the difference between education and Talmud Torah?
So Talmud Torah is we're going to say exactly what the content is, but I'm trying to think how to define it without saying that. It's a theoretical area of study, which has its own specific methodology and its own specific content. So it's distinct from whatever learning you have to do in order to perform another mitzvah.
Does it refer to Talmud?
We'll
and
see.
Mishnah,
We'll
or-
see that it does, but in a very special sense, because what the Rambam means by that is not what other people mean by it. Okay, so let's go from there to the last halacha. So this would be on page. Oops. Yes. Okay. Sorry. It's on the last sheet. It's page 7. I don't think the number came out, but yeah, I see the number's at the bottom. It's halacha 13, but that's at the bottom. Yeah. So it starts, a woman who studies Torah. Right? So Isha, yeah. Isha shalamda Torah, yesh la sachar. A woman who studies Torah will be rewarded. Aval eno kischar ha'ish, but it's not in the same measure as a man. Mipnei shelo nitztaves, because she was not commanded. V'chol ha'osa davar she'eno mitzuva alav la'asoso ein schara kischar mitzuva she'asa ela pachas mimenu. Because anybody who does something without being commanded, they don't get the same reward as someone who is commanded, but they get something less. We'll go through the text to understand why he's saying this in a minute. But again, I just want to emphasize for the moment that I find it very interesting. It comes back to this question at the end. Because despite his social conservatism, it's crucial to his enterprise that women are in fact included in the intellectual activity. So he wants to emphasize at the end that women can study Torah. It's just that they don't have the same obligation to do it. And even though she has a reward, the sages commanded that a person should not teach his daughter Torah. Again, we'll look at the text for this in a minute, and yes, there are other views. Because most women do not have the mind adequate for its study. But they will turn the words of Torah into trivialities because of the poverty of their minds. Amru Chachamim, the sages said, Kol hamalamed es bita Torah ki ilalim de tiflis. The sages said that anybody who teaches his daughter Torah is as if he taught her wantonness or promiscuity. B'ameh devarim amurim, what are we talking about? Torah shebal peh, that's the oral Torah. Aval Torah shebichtav, but Torah that is written, lo yilamed osa lechatchila, you shouldn't teach in the first place. But if you did, that's not like teaching wantonness. So it's in a different status.
This is a different time and a different...
No, this is just based on the Gemara. But my point is that if you look at the way the Rambam reads the Gemara, he's trying to be as inclusive as possible, given his social conservatism. He's not going to challenge the social differentiation of women in his society. However, the things that he says here are not necessarily what you would get from those Gemaras. You might get from those Gemaras that women should be completely excluded from knowledge. And he doesn't want to do that. So I think you have to read this very carefully.
It's an interesting topic given the family.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So
But Bruria was taught by her father, I guess.
How do you know
Bruria
that? How do you know she was taught?
was taught herself.
I don't know. I'm just saying. I don't know where it's mentioned.
Well, we know that she was an educated woman.
She yes, definitely. So I think I would also point out that this is to do with educational policy. I think that's very important as well. There's a difference between educational policy, which has to be for the majority of people of a certain kind, and what sort of specific needs an individual has. And I think that's part of the Rambam's point here, that when he talks about a person teaching his daughter Torah, he means educational policy. They don't establish a school for girls in this society. If there's a specific individual, that's a different story. Different story altogether. And and remember how it starts, that a woman who studies Torah, so that's different from learning it, a woman who herself wants to study and is self-motivated and autonomous gets a reward. It's not obvious, although that is one opinion in the Gemara. Rambam didn't have to say that, but it's because he wants the whole, as part of the whole project, to include women in the epistemic, the cognitive enterprise.
So everything that you previously read about how it's frivolous and all of
Yes.
that only applies to opening a school as opposed to teaching an individual woman?
I think that is, yes. I'm saying opening a school would be an example of a general policy. It could be that everyone was teaching their children at home anyway, but as a matter of general policy. So he thinks, yes, in general, this is not the sort of thing that women's minds were made for. Again, I'm not endorsing this view, I'm just saying what the Rambam thinks. Rambam clearly holds, and he says so in the guide, that different people of different sorts have very different capacities. And that's part of what I'm saying is his social conservatism. So I'm trying to see how he deals with the tension between that and his desire to open up the field of knowledge as much as possible, because every human being is defined by their intellect.
Did his wife learn?
We have no idea. I don't even think we even know the name of his wife.
Wow.
Which is fascinating, because we have actually, due to the preservation of documents in the Kehilah, in the Cairo Kehilah, we have a lot of personal letters and things of Rambam's, which are amazing, business as well as Torah-related topics. But I don't think we even know the name of his wife.
But
So I
Paul,
can't
if
tell you.
everybody was created in the image of God,
Yes.
and women were created in the image of God, therefore they have an intellect.
Isn't that what I've been saying?
Yes, but not less than men.
Right. Okay. That's why I'm saying he's an epistemic
This is not about
progressive.
intellect. This is about whether or not someone is high. I'm sorry.
No, go on.
He's agreeing that women have intellect, and that's why they can participate in the educational process, and that's necessary. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, that when it comes to the actual chiyuv of Talmud Torah and disseminating Torah, that's a different category. But as far as their own personal intellectual development, each person, because they live in some Elohim, have that actual need to be able to pursue it.
Exactly. Right. So the intellectual enterprise is there for every human being. We have to distinguish that from the specific social function of teaching and learning Torah. Those are two different things for the Rambam. And I'm saying everybody has to be involved in the intellectual enterprise, but the social function is something distinct, and as far as he's concerned in his society, that is something that is appropriate for men, but it would interfere with the social function of women, which he doesn't try to change. So he's a social conservative, but he's an epistemic progressive.
I'm not sure about that everybody is defined by their intellect. It's only part of the human being.
Sure, but that's the Rambam's view. Okay, so let's look at some of these texts which are relevant here, which the Rambam is dealing with, and you'll see how he gets this consequence, especially in the last halacha, because I think his main point is that a woman is permitted to study Torah. That's the main point of this. So he starts off by saying that women are potter, women are exempt, but that means they're not obliged. But he ends by saying they're permitted to do it, and they're even rewarded for doing it. So the Gemara in Sota, which is dealing with the Sota ritual, which has to do with the accusation of adultery, says that im yesh la zechus haisa tolala. So it's possible that if a woman has merit, it will delay the punishment for her, even if she's guilty, and so she won't die immediately. And there are some merits that will delay it for a year, some for 2 years, some for 3 years, and so on. So the question the Gemara then raises is, what sort of merit could the woman have that would delay the punishment if she's guilty? Ben Azai says, Chayav Adam Lalamedes Bita Torah. A person is obliged to teach their daughter Torah, because then if she is in this horrible situation of being accused and she's guilty, right? Then she'll know that this merit will help her. Which is a strange reason to say for the obligation.
Ideally, you would think if someone learns
Yes.
Torah that they wouldn't fall into that situation.
Yes, right. But, yeah.
very good.
Now, as I say, Rambam does not hold like Ben Azai. Then this would be a different view. He agrees with the other view, Rabbi Eliezer, who says, no, Kol HaMelamed Bita Torah Kehilah Lamda Tiflis. It's exactly the opposite, right? If you teach them Torah, it's as if you're teaching them promiscuity or wantonness. So clearly Rambam holds like Rabbi Eliezer.
Is that how that word is translated? Bittul or promiscuity?
Tiflis, yes.
Tiflis?
Yes. There's some dispute about exactly what that means, but it seems to be some sort of frivolity, shall we say. Now, a little bit later in the same Gemara, the question comes back again, right, about Torah study, right? V'yesh zchus Torah gimel shanim, right? So we just said that there's some merit that delays it for 1 year, some for 2 years, some for 3. So what merit could possibly be so good that it would delay your punishment for 3 years? And Gemara says, zchus demai, what is the merit of what? Ilay zchus to Torah. If you say the merit of learning Torah, ha'ena mitzvah ve'osehi, ela zchus de mitzvah. You couldn't be learning Torah because she's not commanded and yet she does it. Now that is the basis, I think, for Rambam's reading. He says, so what you see that women do get they are permitted to do it even though they're not obliged. And maybe it's not as much a reward as she would get if she were obligated, but she still is permitted to involve herself in this activity. And then it says, Elas Chosta mitzvah, so it must be some other sort of mitzvah that she performs, whatever that would be. And then there's a whole discussion, which I won't read out all of this, of the different ways in which certain mitzvahs and Torah study protect you from various harms and punishments. At the very bottom of the page, actually we'll just go to the English on the next page. Yeah, we'll go to the English. Ravina said, so this is a little bit later in the same subject, actually the merit that delays the punishment of the soda is the merit of Torah study after all. And with regard to that, what you say, in other words, that she is not commanded to do it, and yet she performs a mitzvah, the Mishnah is not referring to the merit of her own Torah study. You can guess where this is going. It's the merit of her husband and her sons, right? Because she makes the cookies and brings the tea while they're learning. So what I want to point out is that's not what the Rambam brings. He could very easily have gone with this part of the Gemara, it seems to me, and simply excluded women completely from this male domain. And he didn't do that. He picks out a point that's made in the middle of the sugya, which says that women are permitted but not obliged. And that's the view that he goes with. So I'm not trying to make an apology here. I think that it fits with his overall view. He's not, as I say, he's a social conservative, but an epistemic progressive. So to the extent that it's possible to include women in the cognitive enterprise without changing the social differentiation of genders, he's going to do it. And that's why he picks out this particular view in the middle of the Gemara, and not, for example, the view of Ravina, which comes at the end.
So how does he propose to do that unless a woman on her own wants to learn?
Yeah, and I think that's the way it is. If a woman on her own wants to learn, that's great. But remember, as I said before, that education must include women as well.
So what does he suggest doing to include women in education?
I don't know that he makes any particular proposal. I mean, you can get some ideas from here, and I've got no idea what they did in his particular Egyptian society. I don't know. Maybe somebody knows. But it seems to me, again, without changing the social situation, that Rambam does make room for women to study Torah, but in the first place to be educated. Now, an interesting thing also, at the very end of the halacha that we read, right, he distinguishes between instruction in Torah Shebal Peh and instruction in Torah Shebichtav. Right, he said, and he's basing this on a rabbinic text, right, that when Rabbi Eliezer said that if you teach your daughter Torah, it's as if you're teaching her wantonness, that was specifically with respect to Torah Shebal Peh, oral law. But with respect to Torah Shebichtav, that's not so bad. And if you did it, then okay. It's not like that. Now, again, I noticed that this is to do with teaching. Studying on your own is a different matter. But it's also interesting that there's an alternative version of the text, which has the exact reversal of the terms. So if you look at the Tur by Rabbi Yaakov ben Asher, so that would be the 13th, 14th century code that is sort of next in succession after the Rambam's, I guess, in our general ordering of things. He has the opposite text. He quotes Rambam, but he has it the other way around. He says that when Rabbi Eliezer said that to teach your daughter would be to teach her as if you're teaching her wantonness, that's teaching her Torah Shebichtav. That's teaching her written Torah. But if you taught her oral Torah, that wouldn't be so bad. And as a matter of fact, that actually makes some sense for reasons that we'll see when we understand more about what he means by Torah Shebal Peh. It would make some sense to do that. Because Torah Shebal Peh, as we will see, includes philosophy. And therefore it includes the specific study of physics and metaphysics that you would require in order to genuinely know that God exists and is one and is incorporeal. So I'm not saying that is the correct text, but it's interesting that the Torah read it that way and clearly was such a tradition. Okay, so that's what I wanted to say about the inclusivity issue. Let's now go to the second page. And I think, one other thing I want to point out, maybe just before I do that, is also on the second page in the middle. This is a halacha that we already learnt when we did Yisodei HaTorah, the foundations of the Torah. So you see in the middle of the second page is Foundations of the Torah, chapter 4, halacha 13. So this is where Rambam was distinguishing between the study of metaphysics and the study of halacha. And a lot of people got very upset with him, but he read that statement straightforwardly, where the Gemara says that the Davar Gadol, the great thing, is the study of Maseh Merkava, the account of the chariot, which he takes to be metaphysics, and the Davar Katan, the small thing, is the Havoyas Abaye v'Rava. It's the halachic discussions of Abaye v'Rava. And Talmudists are very upset with Rambam for taking that literally. Right? But he says here,
Where is this?
I'm sorry, for taking what literally? That women should learn that?
No, the Gemara states that the study of the account of the chariot, which is Rambam understands to be metaphysics, is a great thing, and the study of halacha is a small thing. So Talmudists have found all kinds of ways to ameliorate that statement so that it doesn't in any way denigrate the study of halacha. Rambam just says, no, that's what it means. One thing is minor in value compared to the other. It doesn't mean it has no value, but it's minor.
Sounds sort of like a passage tape as opposed to a literal.
Okay.
I mean, to say that the Merkava
Yes.
is greater than the halacha.
Okay.
Merkava is about, is metaphysical.
Yes. So the Rambam says in Perik Dal Halacha Yud Gimel that nevertheless, despite the difference in value, Afal Pikein Ru'uyin Hein Lahakdimon. Nevertheless, these halachic discussions, of course, have to come first chronologically. You have to study those first before you study Masei Merkava, before you study metaphysics. Shehein Meyashvin Daita Shel Adam Kehilah. Those are the first things that settle the mind of a person. Educationally, that's how you acquire your sort of intellectual discipline and composure. Ve'od Shehein Matova Hagadolah, and furthermore, they are the great good Shehishpia HaKadosh Baruch Hu LeYishuv HaOlam Hazeh, which God has bestowed upon us for the settlement of this world, Kedei Linchol Chayei HaOlam Haba, in order to inherit the world to come. Right, so you have to know the halacha in order to know how to behave and how to create a society in which people can thrive intellectually. So you couldn't go straight to metaphysics. You have to first understand how to create a good society. Hakol, and it's possible for everyone to know them. These are the halachas. Koton v'gadol, small and big, right? A minor and a not so minor person. Ish ve'isha, a man and a woman. Ba'al leiv rachav v'ba'al leiv katzar. Those who are gifted with great intellectual capacity, as well as those whose intelligence is limited. So I just want to emphasize this as well, that means to say all the halachas that are in Mishnah Torah are for men and women to know, at least in principle. Even if, as I say, women don't have the technical obligation, he's very clear that these halachas are accessible to everybody, and he specifically says...
Required, except when required.
Right. So, yeah, you should know them all. So again, I want to say that is what I mean by saying that there's an educational component to Judaism in general, and that's the whole project of Sefer HaMadah, to emphasize that, and you shouldn't confuse that general educational project in which all people, including women, are included, with Talmud Torah, which is a specific social function in which not all people are included. Okay, so the second halacha now, at the bottom. So, Kishem shechayav adam lelamed beno, just as it's a man's duty to teach his son, kachu chayav lelamed ben beno, it's also his duty to teach his grandson, shene'emar v'hodatom levonecha v'livnei vonecha, because it explicitly says in Devarim, your children and the children of your children. V'lo beno uben beno bilvad, and not only your son and your grandson alone, el mitzvah al kol chacham v'chacham Yisrael, it's a commandment on every sage of Israel, l'lamidis kol talmidim, afal pi she'enon banov, teach all the students even though they're not your children. So this is not biological alone. As we'll see, there's a reason why it mentions children, but it's not only biological. Shene'emar b'shinantam levonecha, it says you should teach them incisively or repeatedly to your children. Mipi hashmua lamdu, we have a Torah Shebal Peh tradition. Bonecha elu tamidecha, that your children here means your students. Your students become your spiritual children. Shel tamidim kruyin bonim, right? Students are called children. Shneimar v'yetzu b'nei halavim. For example, in elsewhere in Tanakh, in the Book of Kings, in Malachim, it talks about the b'nei hanavim, literally the children of the prophets. We've already seen that the Rambam took that to mean that there was a sort of school of prophecy, and these were the students. We talked about that when we did the laws of prophecy. Right. So, im kain laman itztava albanova albenbeno. If so, you might ask, why were you specifically commanded about your child and your grandchild? Why mention it at all in that way? Lahakdim beno leben beno uben beno leben chavera, because there is a precedence here. So, if you have to choose, then your child and your grandchild come before somebody else's, if you're forced to choose, and your child comes before your grandchild. So there's an order of obligation, but in general, we all have an obligation. That's very important for a bunch of reasons. As I said before, we'll see Rambam acknowledges not everybody can teach. But this is economically important, because the Jewish community came to establish a general education system, which we'll see in a minute. And he did so already in antiquity. And that general education system depends on taxation. And that taxation's legitimacy depends on the idea that it's a public good to provide education, even if you don't have children, or if your children are out of the education system. This is still something that the Jewish community would tax everybody for, right? Because everybody is a Talmud, and we have an obligation to teach everybody. So that's really, I think, what this is about: the establishment of Talmud Torah as a public good for the Jewish people. Okay, so now we immediately get to the beginning of the economics here on the next page. So this is the third halacha. Chayav l'skor melamed livno l'lamdo. And if you cannot teach your son, then you're obliged to engage a paid teacher for him. Ve'eino chayav l'lamed ben chavero ela b'chinam. However, you're not obliged to teach the son of your friend except for free.
So you only teach them for free.
So this introduces a tension, it seems to me. So I think it's not a contradiction, but it is an interesting tension, right? So on the one hand, from the point of view of your obligation to teach your child, if you can't do it, you have to go to great lengths to make sure somebody does it. If you have to pay them, and that's the only way, then you have to pay them. Okay, now switch to the other situation. You're a person who can teach. Really, you should do it for free. That's your obligation, is to do it for free. You're not obliged to do it for money. That wouldn't make any sense. In general, we don't say that you're obliged to perform a mitzvah in order to get paid for it. If you're obliged, then you're obliged. So that's already an interesting tension here, which the Rambam will have to deal with, between the obligation to get somebody else to teach your child, which may involve payment, and the obligation to teach, which at least ideally does not involve payment. And I think it's clear the Rambam recognizes that ideally people should not be paid to teach. That's their obligation. But we don't live in an ideal world.
Well, he modeled that, didn't he? He modeled that because as a doctor, that was his payment.
So I think part of his insistence on this has to do with biography. As you may know, and as I've mentioned before, Rambam was supported for a very large part of his life by his brother. His brother David was the family businessman and was in charge of the some sort of trading by sea. And that's a very important feature of the life in the Islamic Empire. Jews were involved in sea trade for the first time, and the Rambam's halachas of partnership deal very largely in innovative ways, drawing on Islamic law with that problem, because they had a new problem that they never had in Bavel, in Babylonia, or in Eretz Yisrael. Of their trade was local, and now, one partner stays at home, deals with the business there. The other partner, you've got no way of contacting them. You don't know if they're dead or alive. And that can create all kinds of situations. Can the other partner, who has no way of contacting you, make deals on your behalf? And so, right? So all kinds of halachic issues. So David, unfortunately, went down with the ship, which was probably pretty common. And Rambam says he was very depressed. He discusses his depression in a letter that we have from the Cairo Geniza. And then he figured he had to do something to support himself. And given his scientific background, it was easiest for him to become a physician. So that's what he did. I don't think they had medical schools. It was more apprenticeship, I think. But he had the basic knowledge. Already he just needed the hands-on training, and he ends up becoming a distinguished physician at the court of the ruler of Egypt at the time. So I think he has very strong feelings about this. And about the need to deal with circumstances that may arise that require you to support yourself. Now, of course, there's no objection. What?
And not benefit from the chiyuv of teaching.
Right. He didn't go into teaching and ask for payment. Nor did he ask the Jewish community to support him for his scholarship. Right? Didn't do those things. had to become a physician instead. And it was a very hard life. He describes in his letter to his translator Shmuel ibn Tibon how get up and he'd go all the way from Fostat to the court and wait just in case he had to be on call, and then he'd come back at the end of the day and he was wiped out. And there was already a line of people waiting for him to ask him questions or to have them resolve their disputes, and it was a busy day for him. But nevertheless, that's what he chose to do. So the reason for this, the proof text for this is, he says, Misha lo limdo aviv. What about somebody whose father didn't teach him? Then chayav lelamed es atzmo. He has the obligation to teach himself, yakir, when he gets to a point where he recognizes this problem. Shneimar v'limantem osam ushmartem la'asosam, as it says also in Devarim, that you may learn them and observe to do them. So you can't observe properly without learning. You find in every place that learning precedes action, because study leads to action, but action in a masa mevilidei Talmud does not lead to study. Okay, so what we'll see in a little bit is that there is a way of overriding the apparent incompatibility of the obligation to teach Torah and getting paid. And I think the basis of that is the Gemara that I put down next from Baba Basra, Kaf Aleph Amud Aleph. So there we talk about the takana, the decree of Rabbi Shiur ben Gamla. So Amar Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, Baram zachur oso ha'ish l'tov. Truly that man is remembered for good. Yeshua ben Gamla Shemo, and his name is Yeshua ben Gamla. She'ilam alehu, if not for him, nishtachach Torah Yisrael. The Torah would have been forgotten from Israel. Kehilah, misha yesh lo av malamda Torah. In the original circumstances, someone who had a father, the father would teach them Torah. Misha ein lo av lo haya lama Torah. But if they didn't have a father, nobody would teach him. That was not ideal. So it didn't work in everybody's benefit, right? And presumably it also means not just an orphan, but what if you had a father who himself was not able to teach you for whatever reason? Either didn't know or was not a good pedagogue, right? My drush, so what was the interpretation? V'limadatem osam, they read it as v'limadatem atem, you shall teach. In other words, you fathers, you shall teach your sons. But then, then they made a change and they said, you know what, in the capital, we'll have a special educational institution. If somebody doesn't have a father, they can bring them, they can get themselves to Yerushalayim. Right? My drush, what was the basis of that? Torah. From Zion, another word for Jerusalem, the Torah will go out. But it was still the situation that education was family-based. So if you had a father, then the father would teach you. But then it was still a problem because who was going to get all the orphans to Jerusalem? Right? So whoever didn't have a father, said, also didn't go up and didn't learn anything. So it didn't actually remedy the situation when they tried to have a single central educational institution in Yerushalayim. So they made a further takana, right? They instituted that they should establish in every single region, and they said that everybody should come in, these are the men, of course, the boys, at the age of 16 or 17. This too did not work. Taking 16 and 17-year-olds who had never been educated and putting them in the classroom was a failure, right? And one of these students whose teacher got angry, Mabitbo, would rebel against him, and would leave. The teenagers wouldn't stand for it.
I mean, nothing's changed.
No. So then what happened, right? So we tried various things and none of them worked. Ad Sheba Yeshua ben Gamla. Till Yeshua ben Gamla came along, great educational reformer. But Tikein Sheyu Mashivim Malamde Tinokas B'chol Medina U'Medina. And he decreed that they should establish teachers of children in every single province, B'chol Ir V'ir, and in every city. So around 6 or 7, which is when primary education began, you should already bring them in. Don't wait till they're 16 or 17.
In Pirkei Avos, it says that you're allowed to take money for teaching because you are losing time
Right.
of doing things
Yes.
when you're teaching, so you're getting paid for your loss of time.
Right. So there are various possibilities, as we'll see in a second. And that's definitely one of them, right? So one way to get around the prohibition of taking money will be to say, you're not paying me for my teaching, you're paying me for my lost opportunities to do something else. And we'll see there's another suggestion as well. So I think, I don't know if I put it down or not, but there are 2 other suggestions that were made. Oh yeah, it's on, let's see. Not the next page, but the page after that where it says Nedarim 37a at the
Yeah.
top.
Page 5.
Right.
Page
Yeah,
5.
yeah. Afilu b'makom shenotlein schar ala mikra shari b'mishkal. Even in a place where they take payment for teaching, it's permitted for mikra, for teaching Torah shebichtav, ala medrash lo shari l'mishkal, but it's not permitted to take for Torah shebal peh. And then Maishna Medrash, what's the difference? Delo, that you don't take for Torah Shebal Peh, except because it says in Devarim, all these proof texts are from the same area of Devarim. V'osi tziva Hashem be'esa hilalamed eschem. And I was commanded, Moshe is saying, right, at that time, l'lamed eschem, to teach you. Uksiv, and it also says, Re'ei limadti eschem chukim mishpatim. I taught you, I taught you statutes and judgments, kasher tzivani Hashem, just as God taught me. Ma ani bechinam, just as I, Moshe, am doing it for free. Vatem nami bechinam. So too, you should teach for free.
Yeah, but Moshe had an endowed share.
That's a good point. Yes.
That's very good.
That's very good. But that doesn't seem to answer the question, right? Because Moshe is teaching them both. So the Gemara says, yeah, okay, but mikranami bechinam. So why not say Torah shebichtav is also free? And then Rav Amar schar shimur. So the suggestion seems to be that the people who are studying Torah shebichtav, mikra, the written Torah, are small children. So there, you could say that you're being paid for the babysitting, right? And not for the teaching. Rabbi Yochanan amar schar pisuk ta'amim, and Rabbi Yochanan said, yeah, you're getting paid not for the content that you're teaching, but for teaching them the melodies, teaching them the notes, the trope, right? But that's not the same thing. That's clearly, it's that clearly distinguishing between that and Talmud Torah in this context. So that's another option as well as what you said, Mom, that you could be paid for the lost opportunity as well. Yes. Okay. So what we see in the Gemara in Baba Basra, I'm going to stop with this, is a whole series of educational experiments, eventually arriving at the idea of primary education as a public good for everybody, and those were to be supported by taxation. So the Rambam, I think, proceeding in accordance with his understanding of the Gemara, says that yes, ideally it would make sense for education to be family-based, and for people who are teaching, who are making up for the inability of a certain father to teach their child, not to be paid. However, because that ideal system didn't work in our world, we established some other systems, and those systems required a different sort of economics. So that's ultimately going to be, I think, the way in which we're going to reconcile these issues. But he's also going to continue this line now, however, that higher education should be free. Right? It's only the lower education that you pay somebody for. The higher education should be free, which is what the Gemara that we read in Adorim just said. Okay, I'm going to stop there. Thank you.
Before you stop and close, did you close it?
No.
I'm sorry, it was on behalf of the Kehilah. Thank you for doing this again, Bob, for us, for really giving honor to our shul by doing this, and to Carolyn Howard for always hosting the share, for yet another term. So thank you for doing that, and it's a real honor.
Yeah. And also, maybe we could just dedicate today's learning to
Zecher Nishmat Anna Rachel Bat Michala Avraham Yekutiel Allah Shalom. She was mother of our dear member and family member of Danny and Sarah. And Hashem should have it on the
Amen.